about what's happening in LA. Is this significant, do you think? Because sometimes my mind goes down this road where what we're seeing the beginning of some type of secession movement. Like, could this blow into something larger that because what's maybe a little bit different about this and George Floyd riots were that this is the federal government coming down and people fighting it, and you have you know, people that just hate Trump so much, including people like Gavin Newsom, that will they be pushing back against the federal government, and then that begins to expand into,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
it's not impossible. It's, these kind of, it seems like when you go back and you look at how revolutions began or secessions, it's always some sort of incident that nobody foresaw and that it's just spun out of control. So, I can't say that it's impossible. We're certainly not there yet. I haven't heard Gavin Newsom talk about secession, though he is talking about an abuse of federal power. So that's sort of like the first step in that direction. Um, yeah, no, it's certainly significant, and these protests and riots, because a lot of them are obviously riots,
Mhm.
eh, are spreading. And I think on Saturday there's supposed to be something there. There's supposed to be protests countrywide, in hundreds of locations across the country. And yeah, we'll see. There's obviously a lot of passions have been unleashed on both sides of this. People have strong feelings, and it could really spin out of control. So far, um, the National Guard was sent, and now what the Marines are being sent, and to aid the LA police, and they still haven't really taken control of the situation. Maybe they will. The whole thing will die down. Probably that's what's going to happen. But but you never know. You never know what the match is that's going to set the whole thing on fire.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on Trump and from his base to be very heavy-handed in his approach with some of these things, and I think that
Yeah,
could backfire. Um, and
right. I
so,
think in general it's probably helped Trump, because most people they don't like seeing the Mexican flag waved at these protests. They don't like seeing police officers attacked. This is real red meat, not just for his base, but I would say probably for the majority of Americans. Their sympathies are going to be with law enforcement and the military, against these protests, especially the rioters. But there are obviously real passions on the other side too, and they have their, the Democratic base is going to support them entirely. And yeah, so there is a potential for a continued widening of the conflict and escalation, and who knows where it'll go. I would bet that in the end, the military and law enforcement will bring this under control, and then we'll go forward. But you never know. You just never know. It's just like we've talked about. In a recent podcast, we talked about the rock bottom levels of support for the federal government in this country, the lack of trust in institutions, and how this fact makes these kind of incidents actually much more perilous than in the past. In the past, we've had riots. We certainly have had riots in LA. We all know that, and some of them very serious, more much more serious than what we're seeing now so far. But there was a great reservoir of trust in the federal government and all the institutions, including, the military. And that trust has eroded significantly. So that makes, each one of these incidents just much more perilous. America is just more fragile than it used to be.
think that the United States is a failed state or becoming a failed state, and maybe in that sense, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that our political system is unable to produce competence
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a definition of a state that is failed or failing.
Yeah, I would say failing because we're still a very prosperous country. We're still powerful. We may not be number one anymore, but it's, I would say failing. But there's signs of failure at the top, and yeah, certainly the kind of people that we've elected in the last few terms is a very strong indication of that. Again, we had somebody that clearly, the Democrats themselves are admitting it was mentally incompetent, and they were trying to put him in a position of power. They were controlling him. That's a huge
that's
story.
so crazy.
Yeah, no, it's really true too. I mean, again, this isn't just some sort of right wing conspiracy theory, but this is something the Democrats themselves are admitting to. And then we have Donald Trump, who, again, he's a showman, but but a man with, I think, healthy instincts that said a lot of things that people wanted to hear, but you know, he just doesn't have the personality, the intellectual discipline, to really affect change. He really should not have become president. I'll agree with the never Trumpers on that point. I disagree on the policy. His policy orientations are, in general, an improvement, and a much needed improvement over the previous establishment. It's not that he's anti-establishment, but that he personally was not, not really competent. I feel that strongly. Yeah, but these are the people that we ended up with. This is what our system produces, and it's not just us. Again, you look throughout the Western world, and we're producing these people that are the people that are rising to the top there's you would want to have the best of the best, and it just can't be true. These are incompetent, but they're worse than incompetent. Again, they are people that are just servants of of the worst tendencies, and the servants of the of lobbies, and for interests, for, like, it seems like any interest except for the interest of their people. That's what we're getting. And so they are products of a system. You're right. How do they get selected? It's not just an accident. I think in the case of Trump, this is not the guy that they wanted. But I think you could say that, like, the election of Trump still proves the point, though he's an exception to the rule. It's an exception that proves the rule, meaning that, okay, he didn't come through the system. He's not really their first choice. In the end, they made peace with him, especially on the Republican side, because they figured, I think, that they could control him. And it's a little bit more than that, but let's not complicate it. But he had to go. He's somebody that made it an end run around the system. So you don't have the normal vetting process. A healthy political system will have a kind of a vetting process. For the parties are looking for people that have proved their competence, right? Starting in local governments and going on up. And they say, okay, yeah, we've all seen him. This guy, he knows how to do the job, and we can present him, to our people, to the electorate. And, and if they approve him, he can become our president. Now, with Trump, that's not what happened. And so, I think in a real healthy system, they say, hey, I like this guy or whatever, but, let's keep him, hosting the reality show or something. Maybe we can have him make stumpy speeches or whatever. He's good at that. But this is not somebody who can actually run a government. You need actually a system to actually to weed out, and then the people can approve or disapprove. Now we have, see, in general, you get these products, these people that are just empty suits. And Biden was the worst of all because he was almost not there. But it seems like that's almost what they prefer, because those people are just total tools. They will do whatever you want them to do. That's the kind of people that are just simply tools of the system, of this corrupt system that does not represent the interests of the people. And that's, again, what we have throughout the Western world. Now, again, there are some signs of rebellion. There's some signs of rebellion within the Republican Party in this country. And then there are, those parties in Europe. So it's not like there is no resistance to this, but that is the system as it exists right now.
Yeah, the system's just broken. It needs to collapse. I don't think there's any chance of reform.
Yeah, that's my sense of the situation as well.
Yeah, just collapse. I hate when we come to that conclusion, though, because it's just like, what does that mean? Nobody knows.
Right. It could be real bad. I mean, the best sort of outcome would be, for example, in the U.S., maybe would be secession, a peaceful secession. I think there's nothing wrong. Again, you look at the old Czechoslovakia. They just had a peaceful divorce. And why not? Say, hey, we're different peoples. We don't have to be forced together. Let's go our separate ways. Okay, bye. And we could do the same thing. As California is California, right? And Texas is Texas. They're very different places. Do they have to be forced under the same roof? I say, maybe again we can reduce the tensions. We won't have the kind of riots that we're having in California if California goes its own way, um, and then again we can pursue different paths peacefully. That would be an expression of, let's say, the multipolar world actually within the U.S. and acceptance of different civilizational paths.
Right. You know why I think that secession is possible is that it's all both on the right and the left that are okay with like California, you be your own state.
Yeah.
The people in California are like, you know what, let's be our own state. Everyone's in the red states are like, yes, California, get out of here. We don't want you. So it's like if you have that on both sides, then why not?
Yeah.
Let it happen.
Right.
It would be I don't know, it would be cool. It'd make football matches more intense. It's like, oh, we're going to a different country now. Let's
Yeah. Right. Again, the people that oppose it are going to be, for example, the military establishment. It would be the weakening of and the globalists in general. Those are the people that are really devoted to U.S. power and U.S. hegemony.
Right.
They don't want it, so they're going to fight
federal
that
government. Right. Is going to be
Right.
totally against it, which means that Trump could never let that happen under his watch either.
Yeah.
That's where it comes to the idea like, oh, could it go and descend into civil war?
Yeah, that's the danger, right? Is that again, these people won't let it happen peacefully. There are too many people opposed to it. But, again, you just never know. Sometimes it's just like you discover, the elites, they have their policy, but in the end, the soldiers have to fire those guns. And what we've seen in the past, all kinds of revolutions and so forth, is that when that command to fire is issued and then nothing happens, you realize, oops, it's over. It's just that it just may be that there are changes taking place on the ground that the elites are not able to control. I don't know that we're there yet. I don't think so. But I think one of these days we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.